Okay, so today we are going to be working on our second type of factoring, which is called dots. Now first, I do want to continue practicing on how to factor GCF because we will be seeing that again. So I want you to pause the video and I want you to do the do now question where it says factor using GCF of this expression. So go ahead and do that, and when you're done, you'll hit play and we'll go over it together. Okay, so we are going to go over the do now. So first things first, we know that we have to first find the GCF of this expression. So in my calculator, I would go to math, scroll over to number, and I would find the GCD of 21 and 84, and I get 21. And I would do the same thing, but I would do 21 and 15 in my calculator. So I get the greatest common factor to be 3. I have an A, I have an A, and I have an A, so I'm going to write that down. And it's a to the first, I have a to the second, and a to the third. So a to the first would be my smallest exponent. And I have a K, I have a K, I have a K. So since they all have a K in common, we write it down. And we take the smallest exponent, which we know would be K to the first. So now I'm going to write my GCF outside a set of parentheses. So I have 3AK, 3AK, and 3AK. So I end up with 7. 21 divided by 3 is 7. A to the first and a to the first, they cancel. I have K to the third and K to the first gives me K to the second. Minus 84 divided by 3 gives me 28. A to the second minus a to the first will give me a to the first power. K to the second divided by k to the first will give me k to the first power. Plus 5, we get a to the second, and the k's will cancel. So that should be a little bit of a review for us from when we did factoring with the greatest common factor. So let's move on. Let's look at dots. So what does dot stand for? So dot stands for the difference of two squares. Now for dots, we are going to have to know what perfect squares are. So what perfect squares are, it's when we multiply a number by itself. So for example, 1 times 1 would give me 1. 2 times 2 gives me 4. 3 times 3 would give me 9. And the list goes on and on. So I'm going to write these down. I hope you're writing these down with me on your own worksheet, which you can again find on your Edmodo. We know 6 times 6 is 36. 7 times 7 is 49. 8 times 8 is 64. So we'll probably go up to 12. So let's write these all down. Okay, so here are your perfect squares. Your perfect squares would be the numbers that I'm circling. So it would be the answers you get when you multiply a number by itself. So you do have to memorize these perfect squares. It's definitely going to make your life a little bit easier as we go along. It's also important to know that any variable with an even number exponent is also a perfect square. So for example, x to the second, x to the fourth, x to the sixth, x to the eighth, x to the 10th, and the list goes on and on. So any variable with an even number exponent will also be a perfect square. So I personally like factoring with dots. I think it's maybe one of the easier types of factoring that we're going to be going over. So let's say I had 25 x to the second minus, let's say, 9y to the fourth power. So let's go through how we would factor this using dots. So first thing is first, you need to know, am I using dots or am I not using dots? So the way we determine that is dot stands for, as we said, difference of two squares. So when we factor dots, we need three different things. It has to have two terms. It must have a subtraction sign. And it must be two perfect squares. And we know our perfect squares we wrote above. We do have to memorize those. So I see, okay, I know 25 is a perfect square because it's in my list here. And I know x squared is a perfect square because it has an even exponent. I have my subtraction sign. 9, let's see, that is a perfect square. It's in my list. And y to the fourth would be a perfect square because 4 is an even number. So first step, you're going to write, I call this double bubble, so two sets of parentheses. One set will get a plus sign in the middle, and one set will get a minus sign in the middle. So that's step 1. Step 2, we are going to take the square root of each term. So if I was to factor this, 25x squared minus 9y to the fourth, I double bubble. I have a plus sign in the middle and a minus sign in the middle. It doesn't matter which one comes first. They just need to one needs to have a plus, one needs to have a minus. So from there, I'm going to take the square root of 25x to the second and the square root of 9y to the fourth. Okay, so if we go to our calculator and we type in the square root of 25, don't type in the x, just type in the 25, we end up with 5. Now, in order to take the square root of, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. In order to take the square root of the x squared, all we do is we divide the exponent by 2. So I have 2 divided by 2 is just 1. So it's x to the first power. So now I want to take the square root of the next term, which we have as 9y to the fourth power. So I do square root of 9 in my calculator. So when I take the square root of 9 in the calculator, I get 3. Y to the fourth power. Remember, when we are taking the square root of an exponent, we are just dividing it by 2. So 4 divided by 2 gives me 2. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take these two terms that I just got, and I'm just going to put them in my parentheses. So 5x to the first, 3x to the second, 5x to the first, 3x to the second. And there you have it. That's your answer. So I don't think that is too bad. Here it is. So we'll do a couple of them together. I'll have you do a couple on your own, and then we're going to go from there. So let's look at the example. So I'm going to do 1 through 6 with you. Then I'll have you work on 7 through 9 on your own. We'll check them together. and then you'll go ahead and you'll do your assignment on Edmodo. So here we go, number 1. First step we know, double bubble. 1 gets a plus, 1 gets a minus. We take the square root of a to the second power and the square root of 4. So, if I take the square root of a to the second power, I'm just going to divide the exponent by 2. So I get a to the first power. The square root of 4 is just 2. So just fill it in. A to the first, 2, a to the first, 2. Now, it's very important to know that they must be put in the parentheses in the same order that you have. So I have a first, so a has to go first. I have 2 seconds, so 2 has to go second. So the order does matter. Make sure you put it in the right order. Don't skip around. So here we go, number 2. X to the second minus 16. So I double bubble. And I put a plus and a minus. I take the square root of x squared and the square root of 16. So then I divide by 2. So I get x to the first. The square root of 16 is 4. So I get x to the first, 4, x to the first, 4. So that's not too bad. So let's take a look at number 3. It looks a little more complicated just because now we have numbers, we have letters, but it's nothing we can't handle. So we double bubble. 1 gets a plus, 1 gets a minus. We take the square root of 25m to the second, take the square root of 9n to the second. So when I put the square root of 25 in my calculator, I will get 5. And I do m to the second, we divide by 2, so I get m to the first. Square root of 9 is 3. N to the second, so I divide n by 2. And I get n to the first. So I end up with 5m, 3n. 5m, 3n. Alright, now we have number 4. 16x squared minus 9, so we double bubble. Plus, minus, 16x squared, square root of 9. The square root of 16 is 4. And I have x to the second, we divide by 2, so I get x to the first. The square root of 9 is just 3. So I have 4x plus 3, 4x minus 3. Now, if you take a look at number 5, that does have a star next to it, and that's for a reason. So we talked about that dot stands for the difference of 2 squares. Difference, we know, means subtraction. If you look, is this separated by a subtraction sign? The answer is no. So we're just going to write cannot be factored, because we must have a minus sign in order to factor dots. So that was kind of a tricky question. That's why we had a star next to it. And the last one, number 6. So I'm going to go ahead and double bubble. I have a plus sign, I have a minus sign. So I'm going to take the square root of x squared and the square root of 1. The square root of x squared, again, we're just going to divide the exponent by 2, and we end up with x to the first. The square root of 1 is just going to be 1. So now I have x plus 1, x minus 1. So now I want you to try some on your own. Why don't you try 7, 8, and 9 on your own. So you're going to hit pause on the screen. And when you hit play, we'll go over it and we'll see if your answers are correct. Okay, so now that you tried them on your own, let's see what we got. So number 7, we double bubble. 1 gets a plus, 1 gets a minus. We have the square root of r squared and the square root of 25. The square root of r squared is going to be just r. the square root of 25 in your calculator gives you 5. So we get r plus 5, r minus 5. For number 8, double bubble, plus, minus. So we take the square root of 4x to the second and the square root of 9. So the square root of 4 in my calculator will give me 2. X to the second, so I divide it by 2 and I get x to the first. Square root of 9 is 3. So I get 2x plus 3, 2x minus 3. And last but not least, we do number 9. We double bubble. So I have plus, minus, the square root of 25b to the second, and the square root of 81. So the square root of 25 is just going to give me 5. And remember, we just divide this exponent by 2, which gives me b to the first power. The square root of 81 is just going to be 9. So I end up with 5b plus 9, 5b minus 9. So now you're going to go ahead. I'm going to assign you an assignment on Edmodo, and you will hand in that assignment so we can see how you guys are doing with this.